A judge told him to go back to Africa, right there in court. What happened next? No shouting, no violence, just one of the most brilliant legal takedowns you've ever seen. This is the story of how a young black man turned a racist courtroom into a lesson in justice. Go back to Africa! The words exploded through the courtroom like a grenade. Time seemed to stop. The jury gasped. The clerk dropped her pen. Even the bailiff, who'd been standing stone-faced near the back wall, shifted uncomfortably. Whispers broke out among the small crowd sitting in the gallery, many of whom were already here in support of Denzel Carter. Cell phones silently began recording. At the center of it all stood Denzel, a young black man, no more than 28, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit and a silver tie that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. His posture was perfect, calm, focused, controlled, but in his eyes you could see something deeper, resolve. He had just taken a breath to begin his opening statement when the judge interrupted him. A gavel slammed. "Order!" The judge barked, his voice coated in years of unchecked authority. The next words that came from his mouth shocked everyone in the room. "Go back to Africa!" Denzel's jaw didn't clench. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't flinch like everyone else did. Instead, he looked up slowly from the papers in front of him, locking eyes with the judge. The room was thick with tension, like the air itself had frozen. This wasn't the first time Denzel had faced racism. But this was different. He was standing in an American courtroom, a place meant to uphold justice, truth, and equality. And here, in this supposedly sacred space, the very man sworn to uphold those ideals, the judge, had just spat out the most vile, dehumanizing insult he could think of, to silence him, to intimidate him, to humiliate him. But Denzel didn't let it shake him. Instead, he reached up and calmly adjusted his tie, took one small step forward, and said in a clear, steady voice, "Your Honor, I have the right to speak, and you're about to learn why." The power in that sentence was undeniable. You could feel the energy in the room shift. The judge opened his mouth as if to object, but then paused. Maybe it was the confidence in Denzel's voice. Maybe it was the realization that too many people were now watching, recording, and listening. Or maybe, just maybe, the judge realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his judicial career. A silence settled over the room again, this time not from shock, but anticipation. Denzel turned slightly to face the jury. Then, slowly, he reached for his notes. His fingers didn't shake. His voice didn't tremble. He began to speak again, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or disrespected because of the color of their skin. "I stand before you today not just as a defendant," he said, "but as a citizen of this country, entitled to the same rights, protections, and respect as anyone else in this courtroom. That includes the right to a fair trial, the right to be heard, and most importantly, the right to be treated with dignity." He turned toward the judge again, this time with unwavering composure. "I came here prepared to defend myself against false charges. But now, I see that I must also defend myself against deep-rooted bias that has no place in a courtroom or anywhere in this country." Every word was razor-sharp, measured, and deliberate. Denzel wasn't just delivering a statement. He was making history. Reporters in the back started typing feverishly. Social media was already buzzing. In just seconds, the name Denzel Carter was becoming a symbol of resilience, courage, and brilliance under pressure. The judge, red-faced and fuming, tried to regain control, but the damage was done. His words were on the record. His prejudice had been exposed. And Denzel? He wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. For every dream crushed under the weight of injustice. For every voice silenced by power. And he was just getting started. Denzel wasn't your average defendant. In fact, he wasn't even guilty. That's the part that made it all the more infuriating. Denzel Carter had never even been inside a courtroom before this, at least not as a defendant. He wasn't some hardened criminal or repeat offender. He was a law-abiding citizen, an educated young man who had grown up with dreams of becoming a judge himself one day. But instead of sitting on the bench, here he was, sitting in front of one. And not just any judge, a judge who had already made it clear, with one racist outburst, that he didn't believe Denzel belonged in that courtroom, or maybe even in this country. So how did a brilliant legal mind end up wearing a defendant's label? It all started with a peaceful protest. It was supposed to be a quiet gathering, students, teachers, parents, marching in solidarity for victims of police brutality. Denzel wasn't even holding a sign. He was just there, supporting friends and exercising his First Amendment rights. But when he saw officers forcefully detaining one of his classmates without clear reason, Denzel stepped forward. Not aggressively, not yelling. Just asking a question. What did he do? Why are you arresting him? That's all it took. One moment of concern, one sentence spoken calmly, and the next thing he knew, he was on the ground. Hands behind his back, knees in his back, sirens blaring. The charge? Resisting arrest and obstructing justice. It didn't matter that he hadn't touched anyone. It didn't matter that dozens of witnesses said he was calm and cooperative. The officers wrote the report. The prosecutor filed the charges. And suddenly, Denzel became just another name on the docket. To them, it was just another case. To Denzel, it was a setup and a test. From the moment he walked into the courtroom, he could feel it. The doubt in their eyes, the assumptions in their stares. The judge didn't hide his disdain. He interrupted Denzel mid-sentence, refused to look him in the eye, and even scoffed when he announced he would be representing himself. This should be quick, the prosecutor had whispered with a smirk, another one trying to play lawyer. They didn't know who they were dealing with, because Denzel wasn't just smart, he was prepared. A graduate of Harvard Law School, Denzel had finished at the top of his class. He had interned under a federal appellate judge and had once co-authored a legal brief that helped overturn a wrongful conviction. He had spent countless nights reading case law, dissecting arguments, and learning how to command a courtroom, not just with passion, but with precision. And though he hadn't yet passed the bar, he knew the law like the back of his hand. He didn't just know how to argue a case, he knew how to tear one apart. But still, he had to make a choice, hire a lawyer, or speak for himself. And Denzel chose the hard road. Not because he didn't have the money, not because he didn't know any good attorneys, but because he wanted to stand up there alone. He wanted to face the system, raw and exposed, and show the world how it really treated young black men, even the most brilliant ones. He wanted the jury to see the contrast. A young man, wrongly accused, calmly defending himself against a stacked deck. He wanted the cameras to capture the arrogance of the prosecution, the bias of the judge, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be broken. This wasn't just a trial. It was a statement. And now, the very same judge who tried to silence him, who dared to scream, "Go back to Africa," was about to be humbled by the same young man he thought he could intimidate, because Denzel Carter didn't come to plead. He came to prove. He came with facts, with evidence, and with a strategy that would reveal every lie in the arrest report, every gap in the prosecutor's argument, and every trace of bias that tainted the bench. The system wanted a quick conviction, but what it got was a reckoning. And as Denzel stood tall in that courtroom, armed with nothing but his voice, his mind, and the truth, people were about to learn that brilliance can't be silenced, especially when it refuses to back down. With his calm, confident voice, Denzel began breaking down the case. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or use flashy words. He didn't need to. He had truth on his side. Standing tall in front of the jury, Denzel flipped open his binder, revealing neatly organized tabs and handwritten notes. His tone was steady, his language simple yet sharp. He wasn't trying to impress anyone with legal jargon. He was speaking to the people, and they were listening. He started with the facts, then layered on the law. This case, Denzel said, isn't about a crime. It's about a misunderstanding, a false narrative that began with fear and ended with handcuffs. He cited Terry v. Ohio, Miranda v. Arizona, and Illinois v. Gates, landmark decisions about police conduct and citizens' rights. His delivery was so smooth it didn't sound like a lecture. It sounded like truth. He pointed out how the arresting officer's body cam footage was never submitted into evidence. That raised eyebrows. Then he showed the inconsistencies between the officer's written report and his in-court testimony. Denzel asked the officer simple, direct questions. At what point did I raise my voice? Did I make any physical contact with you? If I was resisting, why did no one in the crowd report it as violent? The officer stammered, paused, looked to the prosecutor for help, but the prosecutor could do nothing, because Denzel wasn't playing defense. He was controlling the courtroom. And then came the masterstroke. Denzel referenced a recent Supreme Court ruling, Caniglia versus Strum, a case that clarified the limits of police authority in seizing people without a warrant or clear evidence of wrongdoing. The courtroom shifted as Denzel explained the decision and how it applied directly to his own arrest. The prosecutor flipped through his notes, clearly unprepared. One of the jurors leaned forward, visibly intrigued. Journalists, some of whom had thought this would be just another quiet courtroom moment, began texting rapidly. This was newsworthy. The judge, the same man who had tried to humiliate Denzel just days earlier, was now squirming in his seat. His gavel sat untouched. His eyes darted nervously. The balance of power had shifted, but Denzel wasn't done. He took a breath, walked over to the evidence table, and picked up a bound folder. Your Honor, he said, turning toward the bench, I would like to submit into the record the official courtroom transcript from Monday's session. The judge hesitated. Proceed, he muttered. Denzel opened the transcript to a bookmarked page. He looked at the jury. On the first day of this trial, before I was allowed to speak, the presiding judge made this statement. He cleared his throat and read from the page, word for word, slowly and clearly. Go back to Africa. Gasps. The air was sucked from the room. You could hear a pin drop. Denzel looked up from the paper and locked eyes with the judge. That's not just inappropriate, he said. That's not just offensive. That's a direct violation of my right to a fair and impartial trial. He turned back to the jury. And that, he said, holding the transcript up for everyone to see, is grounds for a mistrial. Even the clerk's mouth was slightly open. A few people in the gallery were now standing, silent, stunned, witnessing history. The reporters were already typing feverishly. Phones buzzed. The live stream viewers had doubled in minutes. The judge, now visibly pale, shifted in his seat. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. He glanced at the prosecutor, who stared down at his desk, lips pressed tight. Denzel stepped back, folded the transcript, and returned to his table with the quiet confidence of someone who knew they had just shifted the course of everything. Because that moment wasn't just a turning point in the trial. It was a turning point in the courtroom's conscience. Denzel had not only defended himself, he had exposed the very bias that threatened to bury him. And now, the entire courtroom, judge, jury, press, and public, had to face the truth. The real injustice wasn't in the alleged crime. It was in how the system had treated an innocent man from the very beginning, and Denzel. He had just made sure the world would never forget it. Denzel turned directly to the jury and said, "This case is no longer just about me. It's about justice. It's about what happens when those in power forget they are supposed to protect our rights, not trample them." His voice rang through the courtroom with calm authority. yet it carried the weight of generations. You could feel the emotion behind his words. Not anger, not fear, but purpose. A man standing not just for himself, but for every voice silenced by injustice. The jurors, now fully leaning in, listened as though they were witnessing history. Because they were. Phones were raised, reporters were recording, and within minutes, clips of Denzel's speech hit social media. Justice for Denzel was trending before the court even adjourned. One video, a 37-second clip of Denzel quoting the judge's racist outburst and then stating, "This is what injustice sounds like in 2025, was reposted over 1 million times by the end of the afternoon. Celebrities, civil rights leaders, and everyday people were sharing it with captions like, "This man just took down the entire system with his mind, and this is how you fight back." Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. For those on the other side. The judge, the same man who had mocked Denzel, dismissed him, and tried to humiliate him, was now visibly unraveling. His hands trembled as he shuffled papers that no longer mattered. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He reached for his water glass, but even that small gesture betrayed his unease. He tried to save face. I believe my words were taken out of context, he said, his voice faltering. What I meant to say was, Denzel didn't even need to respond. The courtroom transcript was already entered into evidence. His words were not taken out of context. They were quoted verbatim, recorded by the official court reporter, and broadcast to the world. There was no walking back from that. And then, in an unprecedented move, the prosecutor stood up, not to argue, not to defend, but to surrender. "Your Honor," she said, clearing her throat. "In light of recent revelations and the clear procedural and ethical concerns surrounding this trial, the state would like to move to dismiss all charges." A stunned silence followed. Even those expecting it had to take a moment to absorb what just happened. The same prosecutor who days earlier had treated Denzel like an open and shut case was now backing off, because she had no choice. The case had collapsed under the weight of Denzel's truth, logic, and undeniable courage. The judge stared blankly, as if unsure how to respond. But protocol left him no wiggle room. "I have no objection," he muttered. Then, hesitating for just a beat too long, he added, I'm recusing myself from further proceedings." Effective immediately. It was over. Denzel Carter had not only defended himself in a biased courtroom, he had dismantled the case, exposed judicial misconduct, and held an entire system accountable. As the gavel came down one final time, the room erupted. Applause broke out in the gallery. People rose to their feet. A few reporters ran for the doors to get their stories out first. Denzel's friends and family rushed forward with tears in their eyes. And Denzel? He simply straightened. His tie closed his binder and smiled, not a smug smile, but one of peace, of quiet victory, of dignity. As he walked out of the courthouse steps, camera crews were waiting. Microphones were shoved in his face. He was asked everything from, "How did it feel to win?" to, "What's next for you?" Denzel paused at the top of the courthouse stairs. The golden sunlight hit him just right. The courthouse loomed behind him, but now it no longer seemed threatening. It seemed like just a building. Because the real power had come from within. He looked into the cameras and said, "I didn't do this to win. I did this to show that when we stand up, not with hate, but with truth, we all win." Cheers broke out from the crowd. And just like that, Denzel Carter became a symbol, not just of justice, but of resilience, brilliance, and grace under fire. He walked out of that courtroom not only a free man, but a national hero. And though he hadn't yet passed the bar, America had just witnessed the arrival of one of the most powerful legal voices of a generation. Denzel didn't stop there. For some people, walking out of that courtroom a free man would have been the end of the road, a victory they'd ride off into the sunset with, satisfied and relieved. But not Denzel Carter. For him, that courtroom battle wasn't the conclusion. It was just the beginning. The moment he walked down those courthouse steps and into the waiting arms of reporters, supporters, and cameras, he knew he'd been given something most people never get, a platform, and he wasn't about to waste it. Indy. The days and weeks that followed, Denzel's story spread like wildfire, not just on social media, but on every major news outlet in the country. He appeared on late-night talk shows, spoke at university forums, and was invited to guest lecture at top law schools. Everywhere he went, he carried the same message. The system is broken, but not beyond repair. He spoke calmly, just like he had in court. No yelling, no angry outbursts, just raw facts, personal experience, and the undeniable power of lived truth. He talked about the flaws in the justice system, how race, bias, and authority can combine into something dangerous. And most importantly, he talked about hope, about what could change, about what must change, and the public listened. Donations poured in for legal defense organizations. Civil rights groups reached out for partnerships. Students across the country started citing Denzel's courtroom moment in papers and presentations. And then, just a few months after his case was dropped, Denzel passed the bar exam on his first try. Now officially an attorney, Denzel got to work. He didn't take a high-paying corporate job. He didn't chase the big city law firms. He went back to his community. He opened an office dedicated to representing people who couldn't afford proper legal defense. People like him, who had been wrongfully targeted, misjudged, or silenced by the system. From protesters falsely charged during rallies to young men facing years behind bars for minor infractions, Denzel became a voice for the voiceless. And it wasn't just in the courtroom. He met with lawmakers. He helped draft local legislation aimed at increasing police accountability. He ran workshops for high school students on knowing their rights. He even created a mentorship program for aspiring black law students, because he knew the next Denzel Carter might be sitting in a classroom right now, unsure of their place in the world. His quiet strength, sharp intellect, and unshakable dignity made him more than just a lawyer. He became a movement. And what about the judge, the one who told Denzel to go back to Africa? He wasn't as lucky, The days after Denzel submitted the transcript, the media began digging. Complaints from other defendants started surfacing. Old cases were re-examined. A pattern of bias, misconduct, and inappropriate behavior became impossible to ignore. Under immense public pressure, the state's Judicial Oversight Board launched an investigation. The judge was suspended from the bench, pending a full review of his conduct. His courtroom was shut down temporarily, and he faced widespread condemnation from peers and the public alike. Some called for his resignation. Others demanded permanent disbarment. His career, once untouchable, would never be the same. The irony? He had tried to humiliate a young black man in front of the world. Instead, he humiliated himself and exposed the very corruption he was supposed to rise above. What started as a routine court case became a national reckoning. What started as an insult became a call to action, and at the center of it all stood a man who never once raised his voice, never once lashed out, never once let hate win. Denzel Carter proved something powerful, something unshakable. That brilliance, dignity, and truth are more powerful than any gavel. That justice can still be found, even in a broken system, and that no one should ever be judged by the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or where they come from, especially not in a courtroom, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one holding the gavel, it's the one holding the truth. If this story inspired you, made you think, or just gave you chills, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories that challenge the system and celebrate the human spirit. Drop a comment below and let us know. What would you have done in Denzel's shoes? And hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Thanks for watching. And remember, truth always wins.